You are listening to Talking Africa, the show that deconstructs the news from the continent, brought to you by The Africa Report. Head to www.theafricareport.com for all your news, analysis and comment. My name is Nicholas Norbrook. Welcome to the pod. It's a tough time to be a global diplomat. Trump's America, Putin's Russia and Xi's China are all testing the very limits of the multilateral system. As one of the United Nations' leading diplomats, Nigeria's Tijjani Muhammad-Bande is trying to remind the world of the virtues of facing global problems in a collective fashion. Elected president of the 74th session of the UN General Assembly, he has his work cut out for him, from climate change to security in the Sahel to helping build consensus around global tax evasion and the International Criminal Court. I caught up with him at the Paris Peace Forum. You spent time in Tangiers a long time ago. Well, I say a long time ago, 15 years ago maybe. You worked in Tangiers, and I find that place fascinating for the speed at which it has developed. They have an incredible industrialization policy in Morocco. They now are, bringing in Renault, but also Peugeot. They're building engine blocks in Morocco, because they've really thought long and hard about how countries industrialize. They've got a good blend of strong pro-market policies, but also they support their local actors. Would you encourage other African states who are looking at how to transition into pathways towards industrialization? Would you recommend what Morocco has done, for example?
Well, I think Morocco has done extremely well because there was focused leadership. First, they worked really hard to have a national vision around the need for industrialization. And I think that has worked well for Morocco. It has utilized its resources pretty well. And I think we are all happy that Morocco has gone the direction it has gone. Tangier in particular has transformed naturally. It's an important place.
Do you remember from your time there what it was like 15 years ago?
Yes, it's completely different.
Yeah?
Completely different.
Oh, fantastic. There is, this big debate in development economics about, how you manage to spark industrialization, and you have people from perhaps the more neoliberal state of mind who want to sort of promote the freedom of markets, and others who will point to Japan and South Korea and China and Taiwan and say, listen, in actual facts, there is an important role for the states. What I think is perhaps very interesting is the role for, countries which are less politically coherent than South Korea or Japan. How do countries avoid the problems that might manifest in a place like Venezuela, where the state might be captured by interests? How does a politically weak, let's call it, country spark industrialization without falling into all those pitfalls that we know so well, state capture, etc.?
Well, I think let's be clear. I have difficulty accepting the premise of really rapid development in a politically weak state, because then corruption and a sense of cliques come into play. And I think we're not talking of a strong state, but a state with authority is needed for economic development of the kind we are talking about, because unless we are talking of economic development outside the rule of law, if you have a weak state, then you are talking of really a very grey area where it's really an issue of cliques. And I think that has to be avoided. And more generally, I think what is happening since we started with a global approach is that more and more it's recognized that you cannot have extremes of having the state say the economy is to be left completely to the market forces. I think that is very clear. The state must intervene as a corrective element in things. Otherwise, the level of inequality, and when you have inequality of this kind that can happen without some state intervention, the state itself is in jeopardy. And therefore, more and more, that's why the whole question of minimum rules allowing for human beings to survive, to exist in a given state. Maybe in my village, you may have a different set, but it is still within a particular political context. It may be elsewhere different, but what unifies them is the very idea of a philosophy that, well, we must work as a government to guarantee certain minimum conditions of life for all of us. And there is more and more a convergence. Those states you referred to probably used to have very strong state monopoly of literally everything. That model is hardly in existence in most. You can hardly recognize it. Like 20 years ago, we were very clear as to this, but more and more there's convergence. You can debate what is behind, what is driving this convergence, but obviously technology is one. Several others are there. Mm-hmm. So I think for the continent and for others, I think it's not an issue of an extreme laissez-faire or an extreme control. It is really what works, but which will allow individuality. Without individuality, creativity is stifled.
I totally take your point about the need for politically coherent states. Tax is such an important issue when it comes to states. We have, in many West African states, the government is unable to pay for police officers, security officers. Much of their territories is left, to in the hands of bandits and other bad actors. The Sahel is obviously grabbing all the attention at the moment, but there are plenty of other places in the world which have a similar issue where the states are not able to, deliver services right to the very, very edges of their frontier. If you don't have the means to do that, through taxation, things are going to be very difficult. But as it stands at the moment, and there's been much work done on illicit financial flows, there's a lot of money leaving Africa, tax being avoided by big companies, by individuals. How is the UN helping its member state deal with these issues?
Well, I think several things. I think first, let's be clear that the issue of illicit flows is really not so much a north-south issue. First and foremost, it's very clear that the issue of quote-unquote dirty money and how it corrupts all politics is really a universal one. I think as a student of politics, I can tell you I have known perhaps too much around how dirty money has corrupted politics in many cities that I have studied. Sure. So just it's not an African conversation, it's a global conversation concerning how illicit money can corrupt governance structures. But more and more, it becomes an African or third or less developed states issue because the quantum of funds and involved and what is really needed urgently now, I think makes it an extremely important matter for some countries more than it is for others. And Nigeria has led the charge around the continent to deal with illicit flows. But it's not just a Nigerian problem. African heads of state, through the AU, have done a study to discuss this and also to deal with corruption more generally. Now, as to beyond the continent, there are resolutions of the United in the Assembly, spearheaded by Nigeria, Norway, Germany. Many countries are in this matter to deal with the issue of return of illicit stolen assets and the issue is to put pressure to remove conditions or conditionalities for the return of stolen assets. And to also say, if we are dealing with countries that should be no longer dependent on others, then rather than focus on ODA, which is useful, but start first with the resources that are legitimately for countries. Let them have it and use it judiciously. And the normal studies, most studies have shown that funds stolen, and this stealing is not about north and south, because those who are stealing can be from the same place where the funds are stolen. Yep. So the funds stolen that are wasted, put elsewhere, are far more than official development assistance.
And actually, most of experts on the issues believe that corruption is only a small part of it. The larger part of it is taxes which are owed, which are not paid. So, for example, when you see President of Tanzania tell a mining company in his country, listen, we're not going any further with this project until you settle what is rightfully due. And after a lot of backwards and forwards, the mining company in question has said yes, we will pay. Which so it clearly suggests that there was something to be paid. Is that kind of strong action? We were talking earlier about Morocco's clear national vision. Do you think that kind of clear, the good side of economic nationalism, it's time for that now in Africa?
Well, I am a bit opposed to the whole notion of nationalism, as it can really get a bit. But when you are talking of moral rectitude relating to right and wrong, it speaks to everyone. And the issue is simply, now, of course, come back to the issue. Refusal to pay taxes and not being called to account is corruption, in the sense that there are bodies who are statutorily given the responsibility to get the money. Why are they not getting the money? It is possible because they have been paid to keep quiet. So it's still corruption that is there.
Sure.
But then this issue of recovery of what is owed is a big problem. There are issues concerning corruption, but there are also issues relating to capacity. I think the capacity to really know and to follow may be weaker in some states than in others. And so I think the approach is first to see that people pay, but to do so, we also need to continually improve capacity for those who would wish to do the right thing, to have the capacity to do so. Because you may wish to do something, but if you have no capacity to do it, it's meaningless. So we have to bring all together to get people to appreciate that, one, we need every cent that is for the public to put for use by the public, and whoever have not paid should pay. And we also need to have capacity to follow and obtain what is for the public to be given to the public.
Once upon a time, there was an African revenue service, the South African Revenue Service, which was the pride of the continent. Even Portuguese tax inspectors were being sent for training in South Africa. It was so good. Sadly, in the last 10 years, that particular revenue service has fallen under tricky times. But I wanted to switch to another urgency. You mentioned the fact that it's incredibly important for many African countries because of, be it security or demographic issues, the urgency is clear. With climate change, there's another urgency there. You were talking to President Gela earlier on about these issues, it strikes me that Africa as a bloc does not always have the most coherent negotiating position, perhaps because there are so many, oil exporting countries within it. But there are countries and regions who manage to benefit from international credits available for climate change. India, in particular, has managed to benefit from much of these credits. African countries do not. How can the bloc be made more coherent? How can Africa better access climate funds?
Well, I have little expertise on the issue of how